beginning to see what this Trump phenomena is really all about and where it can potentially lead. And this is not least because as the days pass, what is happening is increasingly in letters 10 foot high. Of course, it will take neon lights flashing before many Trump supporters see through the facade and realize they've been had. And I do completely understand that because there are few more powerful ways to get people to believe something than tell them what they want to hear. You tell them what they don't want to hear, of course, there's a resistance. They don't want that to be true. So they find reasons to reject it. But you tell them what they want to hear, and they're obviously vastly more likely to accept it, absorb it, and see it as real. The progressives and that wing of American politics had this foisted upon them when the system did a job on them with Barack Obama. Of course, what did he do? He told them what they wanted to hear. And then when he got into office, he spent 8 years doing nothing like what he said he would do. In fact, continuing, not least in the Middle East, the policies of Bush. And now with Trump, they've done a similar job on the other wing of American politics by telling them what they want to hear. And Trump has said he will do this, he will do that. He's thrown in a few areas of conspiracy research. He said that, oh no, the whole global warming thing is a hoax. He says it's by China. Nonsense. It is a hoax, but not by China. And he's thrown in a few questions about 9/11 here and there. And he has therefore not only pulled in the if you like, the right in American politics, he's also pulled in much of the alternative media in America into this facade, into this vaudeville that is the Trump phenomena. Because it has to be psychological in the way people are pulled in, because this whole global conspiracy manipulation is a perception deception. You can't control people en masse, billions of people, physically, although this surveillance state is going closer and closer to it. You have to persuade them to believe what you want them to believe, to see the world and themselves as you want that to be seen, so that if you've got their perception, you'll get their actions. You'll get what they'll support, what they won't support. And politics is just an enormous perception deception. This is how it works. If you look into most countries, you have two parties, sometimes three, mostly two, America's a classic, that have any chance of forming a government. So people vote for Party A, and they get into government and they don't do what the people want who voted for them. And so to get Party A out, people are left with one choice. They have to vote for Party B. So they get into power and nothing changes. The same thing goes on, like Obama following Bush, basically. And so now you don't like Party B and what they've done, because they've pretty much done the same as Party A. So how do you get Party B out? You've only got one choice at the ballot box, and that's to vote for Party A again. And so you go A, B, A, B. It's choice. It's democracy. No, it's a farce. It's a rigged system. Now, the next question in this political illusion is, why do the parties do basically the same thing when they get into office? Well, it works like this. If you look at the Bush administration, that was controlled, I mean, even acknowledged in some parts of the mainstream media, by a group of people who were known as neocons or neoconservatives. And then, if you look at the Democratic Party, they are controlled by a similar group of people, not least people including George Soros, Zbigniew Brzezinski, these sort of people, by a group that I call the Democons. And then, this is the key point, if you go back one step more into the shadows, outside of the public gaze, the neocons and the democons answer to the same force, the same masters. And thus, whoever's in power, be it Republican or Democrat, that force is always in power. And the idea, therefore, is to use this perception deception to kid people that they actually have choice when the same force is always in power. And not least thanks to the alternative media over the last few decades, particularly more recently, people have started to see that actually, as some people say in America, it doesn't matter who you vote for because the government still gets in. Yes, the secret government, that force in the background. And so people have got more and more cynical and disinterested in politics, but you've got to keep them interested to give the political system any kind of credibility. So you sell them the first black president. Well, that worked out well for black people, didn't it? That brought people together. And you sell them a man who is about change and he's going to be different. Oh, yeah, vote for him. Well, that, after 8 years, went nowhere, which made many people even more cynical, not least because the person who was from the Democratic side, supposed to replace Obama, is one of the most corrupt politicians, with her husband, in American political history, Hillary Clinton. But then along comes Trump. And what does he do? He grabs the interest of people. Whether they like him or whether they don't like him, he's grabbed their interest. They're engaged in this farce called political choice and political parties. And so now we have Trump replacing Obama, but as I'll come to, what it looks like very clearly is it's just going to continue for reasons I'll explain. And for anyone who doesn't think that presidents are told what to do and that this hidden hand in the background is calling the shots, they should just look at the leaked WikiLeaks email of a man called Michael Froman, a former executive of Citibank, who sent an email to the Obama group before Obama was elected, suggesting the names for his administration in all these different positions, in the major positions of government and their subordinates. And what happened when Obama came to power is that almost in its entirety, those suggestions were appointed by Obama to government. This is the way it works, where this hidden hand is dictating to what are not the most powerful man in the world, but are just gophers for this force. Now, are we really going to believe that out of nowhere, just like Obama appeared to come out of nowhere, that Donald Trump has bucked the system. Hello. Of course, trying to sell Clinton as something different was basically an impossibility. You only look at Clinton and you see system, you see business as usual. And the idea is to sell to people that this new president is not business as usual, while they are business as usual. And so Trump has told people what they wanted to hear. He's told the alternative media in America what they wanted to hear. And so many people have bought the lie and bought the illusion. And the reason I say that the letters are now 10 foot high is, as I said about Trump all along, don't watch the words, watch the actions. So he has, in this short period, given the American economy to Goldman Sachs. Not only the economy, he's got Goldman Sachs people all the way through his administration, including this guy, Steve Bannon, who is right at his shoulder. And he's talking about scrapping vast amounts of regulation. And I agree. The world is far too fiercely regulated. But there is some regulation that is absolutely essential to stop the 1%, less than 1%, from running frickin' riot, as they did in the lead up to the financial crash in 2008. And these are the areas where Trump is talking about deregulating. Oh, we've got to deregulate to help small business. Yes, small business, medium-sized business is being drowned in regulation all over the world. But that's not what Trump's really talking about. That's the facade. That's telling people what they want to hear again. The real beneficiaries of this deregulation that he says he's going to introduce will be the Goldman Sachs, will be the JP Morgans, will be all these giants that led the world into financial catastrophe in 2008. Why? Because there had been decades and decades and decades of deregulation through Reagan Bush, through Father Bush, and through Clinton, that had allowed that free-for-all to happen. And he's talking about tax cuts. Yeah. Tax cuts benefit mostly who? The mega rich. So the idea that Trump is for the working man and the working woman is a nonsense. But that's what the rhetoric says, while the beneficiaries are the very people in the swamp that he says he was going to drain. Then he hands civilian posts as head of the Pentagon, head of Homeland Security, and his national security advisor to military people. I mean, the very idea of putting a military person in charge of Homeland Security is outrageous. And then you realize that there is another common theme, that these military people like Mad Dog Mattis in the Pentagon, Defense Secretary, and the National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, are fiercely opposing and demonizing Iran. This is what Trump has been doing. Then you look at Israel, which in so many ways owns Trump. And they have started this rhetoric and demonization of Iran. Netanyahu was doing it in London when he met the British Prime Minister this week. And of course, Saudi Arabia, who is a truly fundamental opponent and hater of Iran, is in there as well. And I posted this picture on the website and social media on December the 15th last year, because it was already obvious to me where this whole thing was going. When you put the dots, you put the pieces together. And so since Trump came into office, the mantra has been Iran, 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 Iran. And there's a reason for that. Let's go back to the time just before Boy George Bush came to power. This neocon group that came to power a few months later with Bush were behind an organization called the Project for the New American Century. And they produced a document in September 2000 listing a series of countries that they wanted the United States to regime change in what they called multiple theater wars. And these countries included Iraq, Libya, Syria, Lebanon, and the biggest prize of all, Iran. They also called for regime change in China. That'll be fun. And when they came to power with Bush, this policy was instigated. But of course, how do you justify regime changing in those countries and starting a process of catastrophic intervention in the Middle East? Well, along came 1 year to the month after that document was published, and 9 months after those people who wrote it came to power with Bush, along came 9/11, in which they were able to find the excuse to start ticking off those regime change countries. And ironically, the one they've not yet, at least, targeted, and indeed continue to arm with state-of-the-art weaponry to kill people like Yemenis, Saudi Arabia, was, according to the official story of 9/11, nonsensical as it actually was, they were the country from which the overwhelming majority of the alleged hijackers came from. And yet, when countries that have funded ISIS and can't stand Iran. And if you look at Trump's travel ban countries, all you have to do is replace Lebanon on the Project for the New American Century list of countries for regime change. You have to replace that with Yemen. And Trump's travel ban list is an exact mirror of the countries being targeted by the Project for the New American Century in September 2000. And then you look what has happened since that document was published. After Afghanistan, justified by we must get bin Laden because the Taliban's there and he's there. There was the invasion of Iraq, completely made up with weapons of mass destruction. Why? It's on the list. They don't have a reason to invade Iraq, so they made one up. Simple as that. And then the two politicians fronting that up, Boy George Bush and Tony Blair, they were replaced at the time of the invasion of Libya by Obama and David Cameron, the British Prime Minister. Now we've got different politicians from different parties to the other two, but it's the same list. Now we're on to Libya on the Project of the New American Century list. And then where did they go next? Into Syria. Says the former French Foreign Minister Roland Dumas said on French television that he was in London talking to British government officials before the trouble started in Syria with the so-called Arab Spring People's Revolution. And these British officials told him, before anything had happened, that they were going to start something in Syria with rebels against Assad. And this is what has happened in relation to America, or this is what's behind it, as they have picked off these countries on this Project for the New American Century list. Here is a document headed U.S. Special Forces Unconventional Warfare Strategy, November 30th, 2010. And this isn't the American military process, technique for regime changing these countries on that list. This is what it said. Remember, November 2010. The US military's unconventional warfare strategy requires that target state population perceptions are first groomed into accepting an armed insurrection using, quote, propaganda and political and psychological efforts to discredit the government. That's what happened with all these countries that they have been involved in with this Arab Spring. This, they say, will create local and national agitation, helping organize, quote, boycott strikes and other efforts to suggest public discontent before beginning the infiltration of foreign organizers and advisors and foreign propaganda, material, money, weapons, and equipment. Exactly what happened in Libya, exactly what happened in Syria. And it goes on, if retaliation by the target government, in other words, if the government defends itself from your so-called freedom fighter people's revolution, which you've orchestrated and funded and armed, if there's retaliation from the government to that, the resistance can exploit the negative consequences to garner more sympathy and support from the population by emphasizing the sacrifices and hardship the resistance is enduring on behalf of, quote, the people. This is why nothing was said when these Western armed, funded and trained rebels and mercenaries started attacking the regime of Gaddafi. It was only when Gaddafi responded, was only when Assad responded that suddenly he's killing his own people, and the whole psychological game was played out exactly as they said. When? November 2010. 1 month later, after this was published, and of course it would have been in the background organized long before, we had the start of the Arab Spring with the events in Tunisia. And George Soros and his networks are, of course, behind that, if anyone wants to do a modicum of research. So we have these countries on the Project for the New American Century list being picked off quite demonstrably across different administrations, because that force I talked about earlier in the background is in control of whoever's in power. So that agenda plays out through whoever's in power, or officially so. But then you might say, well, there's a problem with this, because Obama did this nuclear deal with Iran, the big prize of these people. And so everything was honky-dory there. And people said to me at the time, well, where's this Iran thing you were talking about? Because, Obama's done this deal and everything seems fine with Iran. Well, let me go back to another document. It's from 2009, and it was published by a think tank connected to all these networks I'm talking about, and funded by their sources, called the Brookings Institution. And this was a document published in like I say, 2009, and it was called "Which Path to Persia? Options for a New American Strategy Towards Iran." And it said that Iran should be given a, quote, superb offer, only to be intentionally revoked in a manner that portrayed Iran as ungrateful. Anyone notice the connection with current events? This is what the document said. Any military operation against Iran will likely be very unpopular around the world and require the proper international context, both to ensure the logistical support the operation would require and to minimize the blowback from it. The best way to minimize international opprobrium, criticism, censure, and maximize support, however grudging or covert, is to strike only when there is a widespread conviction that the Iranians were given, but then rejected, a superb offer, one so good that only a regime determined to acquire nuclear weapons and acquire them for the wrong reasons would turn it down. Under those circumstances, the United States or Israel, it says, could portray its operations as taken in sorrow, not anger, and at least some in the international community would conclude that the Iranians brought it on themselves by refusing a very good deal. Did I mention it was a perception deception, the whole thing? Exactly what it is, exactly what this is. So, this superb offer then was produced and negotiated by Obama and other countries, including the European Union, with Iran. And everything seemed fine. But when Trump came to power, it was all very different. He said the deal was basically a disaster and bad for America. And when there was a testing by Iran of a ballistic missile recently, which was not in contravention of the deal, they had their excuse. And what did Trump say? Trump said, and so did this Michael Flynn, national security advisor and Iran hater extraordinaire, along with his mate, Mad Dog. They said that Iran had been put on notice, and that Trump said that Iran should have been thankful, here's the wording again, should have been thankful for the nuclear deal. And this is one of his tweets. Yes, the American president communicates with the world on Twitter. This is what Trump said. Iran is playing with fire. They don't appreciate how kind President Obama was to them, not me. Which kind of fits this whole Brookings Institution scenario to put the blame for any conflict upon Iran. And this is how it works in the background, manipulating public perception to accept what the agenda wants. This is why all the propaganda against Gaddafi at the time, all the propaganda against Assad, that's what it's all about. All the propaganda against Saddam Hussein about weapons of mass destruction that could strike British targets in 45 minutes to justify an invasion. It's all a perception deception. And so let's come back to Trump. You have a situation where this man is perceived to be different and outside the system. I mean, don't start me laughing, I'll never stop. And yet what we're seeing is a continuation of the same theme and the same countries being targeted that has passed through Boy Bush, Obama, and to Trump. And, you know, the people in the alternative media who have campaigned against certain things and exposed certain things over the years, they really do need to rub their eyes and refocus on what they're now supporting. We have a situation where Goldman Sachs has been given the economic control of the United States. We've had these military people given these what should be civilian posts. We've got Trump talking about torture is justified, demonizing Iran on the way to seeking conflict with them, and you know, causing chaos. And as I said in last week's video cast, chaos is the currency of these people. They want chaos so that they can offer the order out of the chaos, which is to transform society in the way they want it to change. It's what might be called creative destruction. You destroy the status quo through chaos, whatever that status quo is. You then change the status quo. You then creatively destroy that status quo, and so it goes on. And at each new status quo, the world has changed. There's no two greater examples than the world wars in the 20th century. The First World War vastly changed and creatively destroyed the status quo that had been before. And then the Second World War came along and destroyed the status quo that had followed the First World War. And we're just seeing the continuation of this. And you see, this is the danger. I'm not even saying that Trump is fully aware of what's going on. He probably isn't. But the people around him are. The people in the shadows that control the people around him are. And what they have now in the White House is an extreme narcissist with an ego so big and so fragile that he can't let criticism on Twitter go, or criticism by some celebrity go, without having to react to it. This is not what mature, secure people do. And so because of his lack of awareness of the whole political system, he'll have some from his life in business, but I mean really deeply. And because of his narcissistic, egotistical, reactive behavior, the big I am, he is a manipulator's party trick. I mean, if you gave a manipulator a blank sheet of paper and said, describe your ideal person to manipulate, they would draw a picture of Donald Trump. And we need to, those that support Trump need to see this. And those that don't support Trump also need to get informed about how the world really works, instead of just reacting to it in this two-party left-right manner. We need to take a step back and see the left-right nonsense as just an irrelevance to anything that's going to change anything. Because that left-right us and them structure mentality is what's holding people in this illusion where nothing changes. And if you look at it, it's like an electrical system where both sides need each other. You know, you've got one polarity, the progressives, and then you've got the other polarity, which are basically now the Trump supporters. And they create, by their resistance, they talk about resistance. Well, it is an electrical circuit is made between the two, and the electrical circuit goes on doing this and changes nothing, but creates the very upheaval that the hidden hand wants to justify more and more of the police state and the surveillance state. And that's another thing. When you look at Sessions, Bush's, not Bush's, Trump's, it could be Bush's involved there. When you look at him as Attorney General and his attitudes to human rights and freedoms, what we're also going to see through this Bush, these are Freudian slips, but they're very apt, because I could have said Trump there, and I could have said Bush, and I could have said Obama. Tragically, that's how it works. And we're going to see through this Trump administration also, justified by law and order, more and more advances of this surveillance state and this police state. Not least now, they have a military man running Homeland Security. So on the day that Bush was, I've said it again, Bush, Obama, Trump, on the day that Trump was elected, I said that it was a primal scream for help by vast numbers of Americans who had been ignored decade after decade. But that they were voting for an illusion that Trump was not what he claimed to be. We're now starting to see that already. But I said I hoped that the experience of seeing the Trump illusion unfold would lead people to the next stage, which is the realization that this rigged political system of left, right, Democrat, Republican, conservative, Labour, whatever country, whatever parties, this rigged system is never going to change anything for the better. And thus we have the realization that there are billions of us and a very few who are in full awareness manipulating those billions towards the end that my books expose in detail. And if we stop cooperating by not following the diktats of these people when they impose and impinge upon our freedoms and basic justice and fairness, then we take their power away. We have the power, but we give it away in acquiescence to that which we think has the power. The only power they have is the power that we give them day after day after day. We need to take it back and start saying we're not having it. Not by voting for Trump or voting for Clinton. It's going to change nothing. But by refusing to cooperate with what the system seeks to impose upon us. Do that and we'll get somewhere.